The last time I drove past the Caravel Town Center was in November, about 14 months after I quit. It was the middle of the afternoon, the parking lot half full, people walking in and out with shopping bags, a woman pushing a stroller near the south entrance. Normal. Completely normal. And I still had to pull over because my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't keep the wheel steady. I'm going to tell this as carefully as I can, not because I think anyone will do anything about it. I don't, but because the person who left the card for me deserved to be believed, and I didn't believe them in time. I want to be the account that someone reads and takes seriously, even though nothing I'm going to describe will sound like it warrants that. I'll start with the facts. Caravel Town Center is a mid-size enclosed shopping mall in the eastern part of the state, built in 1987, renovated in 2004, and partially re-tenanted in 2019 after a period of steep vacancy. It's not abandoned. It's not dead. That's important. People shop there during the day. There's a Target anchor on the north end and a Dick's Sporting Goods on the south. There's a food court on the second level with a Panda Express and a Subway, and a local place that sells Greek food. There's a fountain in the south atrium that hasn't worked in years, which the management keeps promising to restore. It's an ordinary American mall that is performing slightly below market expectations. There is nothing about its appearance, history, or reputation that would make you look twice. I took the overnight security position because I needed the money, and the hours didn't conflict with my day classes. I was 23, finishing a delayed bachelor's degree in accounting, and the position paid $15 an hour for an 8-hour shift, Thursday through Sunday, 11 at night to 7 in the morning. The posting was through a third-party security company called Gray Line Protection Services. They handled the contract for the mall's management company, which was itself a subsidiary of a real estate investment trust based in Delaware. I mention this because it matters later the layers of distance between me and anyone who actually made decisions about the building. My interview was over the phone. A woman named Deborah asked me if I had reliable transportation, whether I'd ever been convicted of a felony, and if I was comfortable working alone overnight. I said yes to the first two and hesitated on the third, and she laughed and told me it was the easiest job in the world. Walk the building every 2 hours, check the locks, make sure nobody's sleeping in the corridors, radio the monitoring service if anything came up. She said the hardest part was staying awake. My first shift was a Thursday in September. I arrived at 10:45 and parked in the empty lot near the security entrance on the building's east side. A day shift guard named Marco was waiting to hand off the keys and walk me through the basics. Marco was in his 50s, heavyset, friendly in a distracted way, and clearly eager to leave. He showed me the security office, a small room behind the management corridor on the first level with a desk, a bank of monitors connected to 16 cameras, a two-way radio, a logbook, and a mini fridge someone had stocked with bottled water. He showed me the key ring, one for the security office, one for the main entrances, one for the maintenance corridors, one for the freight elevator between stockroom C and the loading dock, and a master that opened most of the interior utility doors. Marco walked me through the camera system, which was straightforward. 12 interior cameras covering the main corridors, food court, and atrium areas. 4 exterior cameras covering the parking lots. The feeds were recorded to a local server that Gray Line accessed remotely. Marco said he'd never once seen anyone review the footage. He showed me the patrol route, which was a loop. Security office to the east corridor, north through the main hall past the shuttered storefronts, up the escalator to the second level, through the food court, down the west corridor, south past the anchor stores, through the south atrium, and back to the security office. 20 to 25 minutes per round, 4 rounds per shift, at midnight, 2, 4, and 6. He told me good luck, reminded me to lock the security entrance behind him, and left. I sat at the desk and opened the top drawer to look for a pen to start the logbook entry, and that's when I found the card. It was zip-tied to the metal frame inside the drawer, which is why Marco probably never noticed it or thought it was part of the desk's hardware. I had to twist it around to read it. It was laminated, about the size of an index card, with text that had clearly been handwritten first and then photocopied before lamination. The ink had faded unevenly, darker on the left side, almost ghostly on the right, as if the original had been written over time, not all at once. I read it. My first reaction was annoyance. I thought it was hazing. Security guys leaving weird notes for the new hire, some kind of tradition to see if the rookie would freak out. The rules were specific in a way that struck me as rehearsed. Count the food court tables. Don't investigate footsteps. Don't read store names aloud. Don't walk down long corridors. Don't open the freight elevator. Don't look at the fountain water. It read like a campfire story someone had workshopped. I almost zip-tied it back and ignored it, but something about the physical object gave me pause. The lamination was old, not peeling yet, but the edges had yellowed. The zip tie was the heavy-duty kind, black, UV-resistant, the type you'd use to secure wiring or outdoor equipment. Whoever attached this hadn't used a twist tie or a piece of tape. They'd anchored it to the drawer frame as if they were ensuring it couldn't be casually removed. And the handwriting, when I looked closely, wasn't playful. It wasn't the handwriting of someone having fun. The letters were controlled, but there were places the word drawn in Rule 4, the word yourself in Rule 6, where the pressure of the pen had increased enough to slightly emboss the paper beneath the photocopy. Someone had pressed hard while writing those words. I set it on the desk and started my shift. The first round at midnight was uneventful. The mall at night is exactly what you'd expect if you've ever been in a large commercial building after hours. The emergency lighting casts everything in a flat, pale wash. The floors are polished and reflective, so your own movement appears beneath you as a dark smear. The storefronts are shuttered with metal gates, and behind them, the display lights are off, so each store is a dark cell behind a lattice. The escalators are stopped but still navigable as stairs. The air handling system produces a low, constant hum that sits just below the threshold of conscious attention, which means you never quite get used to it, and it never quite becomes background noise. I walked the route Marco showed me. I checked locks. Everything was locked. I walked through the food court on the second level, and without really meaning to, I counted the tables. There were 9. I noted this in the logbook with a kind of ironic amusement, as if I were humoring the card. I completed the loop, returned to the security office, and sat down. The cameras showed nothing. Empty corridors, empty lots. The timestamp ticked forward. At 1:15, I heard footsteps. They were distinct, not mechanical, not rhythmic the way a fan or a compressor would cycle. They were footsteps, the specific, irregular cadence of a person walking at a moderate pace through a hard-floored corridor. They were coming from the West Wing, which is exactly what the card said. I sat up in my chair and looked at the monitors. Cameras 5 and 6 covered the West Corridor. They showed nothing. Empty floor. No movement. But the sound continued, clear enough that I could track its approximate position. Someone walking north to south, steadily, about 60 or 70 yards from the security office. My first instinct was to investigate. That was, after all, the entire job description. I was paid to investigate unexplained sounds in the building, but the card was sitting right there on the desk. And the second rule was precise. Do not investigate. Do not try to determine their source. Log them as HVAC cycling. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, listening. The footsteps continued. They didn't accelerate. They didn't stop. They maintained the same pace, the same volume, the same trajectory. And then, gradually, they faded, not as if the person had stopped walking, but as if they'd moved far enough away that the sound simply diminished below what I could hear. I picked up the logbook and wrote, 1:17 a.m. HVAC cycling noted West Wing. I put the pen down. My hand was completely steady. I didn't feel afraid. I felt alert in a way that was new, like a frequency I hadn't used before had been switched on. The rest of that first shift was quiet. I completed all 4 rounds. The mall was empty. The food court had 9 tables every time I passed through. The corridors were the lengths they were supposed to be. The freight elevator was locked. The fountain was dry. At 7, the day crew arrived and I drove home and slept until noon and went to my afternoon class and didn't think about any of it. My second shift, Friday night, is when the card started to earn its credibility. The rounds at midnight and 2 were normal. At 2:20, after I'd returned to the security office from the second round, I was checking the cameras and noticed something on camera 11, which covered the south entrance interior near the directory kiosk. The kiosk was a freestanding digital display, the kind that shows a map of the mall with store names and locations. During the day, it was interactive. You could touch it to search for stores. At night, it defaulted to a static directory screen, white text on a dark blue background, listing every tenant alphabetically. On camera 11, the kiosk screen was active. This in itself wasn't unusual. It was always on, even overnight, but something about the display looked different. The resolution on the security cameras wasn't high enough for me to read individual words, but I could see that the text layout had changed. The usual directory was a 2-column list. What I was seeing on camera 11 appeared to be a single column, and the entries were longer, not store names, but phrases, or possibly sentences. I considered ignoring it. Then I considered that it might be a software glitch I should log. Then I remembered Rule 3, and a feeling settled into my chest that I can only describe as the sensation of being watched by a test you didn't know you were taking. I did not go look at the kiosk. I logged directory kiosk display irregular possible software error reported to monitoring service. I radioed the monitoring service and told them the same thing. The dispatcher, a man whose name I never learned, said he'd note it. He didn't sound concerned. I went back to the cameras. By 3 a.m., the kiosk had returned to its normal 2-column layout. Saturday night was when I first encountered Rule 4. I was on my 2 a.m. round walking north through the main first-floor corridor past a series of shuttered stores. This part of the mall is a straight line, about 120 yards from the south atrium to the north anchor entrance. I'd walked it 3 times before without incident. This time, about a third of the way through, I had the sensation that the corridor was longer than it had been. I want to be precise about what I mean. I don't mean it felt longer in the emotional sense, the way a walk seems to drag when you're tired. I mean the physical space appeared to have expanded. The north entrance, which I should have been able to see ahead of me as a faint outline of glass doors and exterior light, was not where it should have been. The corridor continued beyond the point where it should have ended. The storefronts on either side were still there, still shuttered, still recognizable. I could see the GameStop, the T-Mobile, the vacant unit with brown paper over its windows, but beyond them, the corridor kept going. And the stores I could see further ahead were ones I didn't recognize, not stores with unfamiliar names, stores with no names at all, just shuttered fronts with dark interiors, receding into a distance that the corridor did not actually contain. And Rule 4 was right. I felt the impulse to keep walking. It wasn't curiosity. It was something more mechanical than that, more like the feeling of being on a conveyor belt. Not that my feet were moving involuntarily, but that the forward direction felt frictionless and every other direction felt like it would require enormous effort. Continuing was easy. Stopping was the hard thing. I stopped. It took more effort than it should have. I turned around and walked back the way I'd come. The rule said not to run, and I didn't run, though every part of me wanted to. I walked at a steady pace, and behind me I could feel this without looking. The corridor was still extended, still pulling, still offering that frictionless forward path. The pull diminished with every step I took in the opposite direction, like wading out of a current. By the time I reached the south atrium, it was gone. I didn't finish that round. I went back to the security office and sat at the desk and put my hands flat on the surface and breathed until my heart rate came down. Then I picked up the laminated card and read it again. All 6 rules. Slowly. And for the first time, I didn't read them as a prank or a campfire story. I read them as instructions written by someone who had walked the same corridors and faced the same decisions and found, through experience, the minimum set of behaviors that would keep a person intact. I started paying attention differently after that. Over the next several weeks, I built a working understanding of the building's nighttime behavior. The footsteps in the West Wing occurred every shift between 1 and 3, as described. They never varied in pace. They never responded to noise I made. They were consistent enough to become almost routine, which was its own kind of unsettling. The regularity suggested a process, not an event. Something was walking that route on a schedule, and the schedule had nothing to do with me. The food court tables were reliably 9, until they weren't. 3 weeks into the job, on a Saturday shift, I walked into the food court at midnight for my first round and counted 10. The extra table was near the northeast corner, between the Panda Express and the Greek place. It was identical to the other 9, same round laminate top, same metal base, same 4 chairs. It wasn't new. It looked exactly as worn as every other table, but it hadn't been there on Friday, and I had counted 9 on Friday, and now there were 10. Rule 1 said not to walk through the food court if there were more than 9. I used the east maintenance corridor to bypass it and continued my round. When I came back through on my 2 a.m. round, I approached the food court entrance and counted from the threshold. Still 10. I bypassed again. At 4, I counted from the threshold. 9. The table was gone. Not removed. There was no sign of it having been moved, no scuff marks, no displaced chairs. It had simply stopped being there. I began logging the table count at the start of every round in a personal notebook I kept separate from the official logbook. Over the next 2 months, the count exceeded 9 on 7 occasions. The extra table always appeared in a different location. It always looked like it had been there forever. It was always gone within 2 to 4 hours. I never walked through the food court when it was present. I never learned what would have happened if I had. The card didn't explain consequences. It just said, "Don't." The directory kiosk changed its display 4 more times during my employment. I never went close enough to read it. The second time, on a Thursday in late October, I was walking past the south entrance during a round and caught the kiosk in my peripheral vision. The display was different single column, long entries, that same wrong layout. I kept walking. I did not read it. But in my peripheral vision, just before I passed out of range, I had the impression that one of the entries was longer than the others, and that it was changing. The text was scrolling or rewriting itself, character by character, as if composing something in real time. I want to be clear. I did not read it. I followed the rule, but the peripheral impression stayed with me. And that night, I dreamed about text on a screen that I couldn't quite resolve. And in the dream, I leaned closer and closer, and I woke up before I could read it, and my mouth was open as if I'd been about to speak. The freight elevator was the rule I understood the least for the longest time. The elevator connected the basement-level stockroom to the loading dock on the east side of the building. It was industrial, a simple platform with a metal gate, the kind you operate with a key and a lever. It was supposed to stay locked, and it was always locked when I checked it, every round for the first 6 weeks. The key sat on my ring between the maintenance corridor key and the master, and I never used it. The rule didn't explain why, and unlike the other rules, I had no experiential data to build a theory. The elevator was locked. It stayed locked. I checked it, confirmed it, and moved on, until the night it was open. This was in the first week of November, a Thursday. I was on my 4 a.m. round walking through the east maintenance corridor that connected the main building to the loading dock area. I turned the corner toward the freight elevator and saw that the gate was up. The elevator platform was at my level. The interior of the shaft was visible. I stopped. My flashlight beam was already pointing at it, and in the half second before I processed what I was seeing, The light entered the shaft and showed me the back wall, except there was no back wall. The shaft continued backward, not into the building, which was structurally impossible, but into a space that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't dark in the way that an unlit room is dark. It was an absence of surface. The light went in and didn't come back. I remembered Rule 5, do not look inside. I had already looked. The question was what to do now. I lowered my flashlight beam to the floor, stepped forward with my eyes on the gate mechanism, and pulled the gate down. It resisted. Not mechanically, the track was fine. The wheels were in their channel, but the gate felt heavier than it should have, as if something on the other side was leaning against it. Not pushing, leaning. The way a person leans against a door they don't want you to close. Not with force, but with presence. I pulled it down. I locked it. I took the radio from my belt and pressed the call button and said, "Elevator 3 secure. No access logged." The dispatcher said, "Copy." I walked away. That night I sat in the security office for the remaining 3 hours of my shift without doing my 6 a.m. round. I know that was a dereliction of duty. I logged the round as completed. I watched the cameras. Nothing moved. The building was still. But something had shifted in my understanding. The first 5 rules I'd come to think of as safety protocols. Strange ones, yes, but functionally similar to the kind of practical warnings you'd encounter in any unusual workplace. Don't go near the machine when it's running. Don't touch the exposed wiring. Stay out of the restricted area. The rules define boundaries, and as long as I stayed within them, the building's irregularities remained just that, irregularities. Things that happened in my vicinity, but did not happen to me. The freight elevator changed that, because whatever I'd seen in the shaft, that absence, that depthless continuation wasn't an irregularity. It was an exposure. For a moment, the building had shown me what it was behind its surfaces, and what it was had no back wall, no dimensions I could name, and a weight that could lean against a gate without moving it. I started thinking about the person who wrote the card. The handwriting was not the handwriting of an engineer or a maintenance worker. It was neat, considered, slightly cramped, the handwriting of someone who planned documents or took notes in meetings. I noticed that the rules were ordered not by importance or by location on the patrol route, but by likelihood of encounter. The food court table's the most frequent anomaly, the footsteps every single night, the kiosk intermittent but common, the corridor less frequent but predictable, the elevator rare, the fountain the last rule, the one that applied only at shift's end, the one that had never triggered for me. This ordering suggested experience. Whoever wrote these had worked enough shifts to establish frequency patterns. They'd walked the same route I walked. They'd heard the same footsteps. They'd counted the same tables. And at some point, they'd stopped working here and written down what they'd learned and attached it to the inside of a drawer for the next person to find. I tried to find them. I asked Marco casually if he knew who'd worked nights before me. He said the position had been empty for a while. At least a few months. Before that, he didn't know Greyline cycled people through, and he didn't keep track. I called Greyline's office and asked Deborah if she could tell me who'd held the overnight position previously. She said she'd check, but never called back. I called again and was told Deborah was no longer with the company. The new contact, a man named Phil, said personnel records were confidential and asked if I had a shift-related concern. I said no and hung up. The card remained my only connection to whoever had come before me, and the more I studied it, the more I noticed small details that unsettled me. The phrase, "even if it sounds like yourself" in Rule 6. Not even if it sounds like your name, or even if it sounds like someone you know. Yourself. Your own voice. The person who wrote this had heard their own voice call them back, and they'd still made it out. That's what I held on to. They'd heard their own voice, and they'd kept walking, and they'd survived, and they'd written the rules, and they'd left. Survival was possible. The proof was in my hand. November continued. The table count exceeded 9 twice more. The corridor extended once, on a Saturday, and I followed the protocol, stopped, turned, walked back. The footsteps continued every night, unchanging, mechanical in their regularity. The kiosk changed once more. The elevator stayed locked. The fountain stayed dry. I was beginning to think I had a handle on the system. I was beginning to think of myself as competent within it, the way you become competent at any job with practice. Check the tables. Avoid the food court if the count is wrong. Bypass the footsteps. Don't read the kiosk. Watch for corridor distortion. Check the elevator. Confirm the fountain. Log everything in the approved language. Collect my paycheck. This was the most dangerous thing that happened to me at the Caravel Town Center, and it didn't come from the building. It came from me. Competence bred familiarity, and familiarity bred a kind of contempt not for the rules, which I followed religiously, but for the threat itself. I'd been working there for 2 months, and nothing had happened to me. The building did its strange things, and I navigated around them, and nothing touched me. I began to suspect that the horror of the place was more atmospheric than actual, that the rules were sufficient, that the worst-case scenario was a feeling of unease rather than a real danger. I want to be specific about this because I think it's the mechanism by which the building eventually gets people. Not through a single dramatic failure, but through the slow erosion of vigilance that comes from repeated safe exposure. The rules keep you safe. The safety makes you comfortable. The comfort makes you less careful. And then the building finds the gap. The gap for me was the kiosk. It was a Friday night in late November. I was on my midnight round walking south through the first-floor corridor toward the south entrance. The kiosk was ahead of me and to my left. The display was wrong, single column, long entries, the same irregular layout I'd seen before. I began to angle my path to the right, away from it, as I always did. But this time, as I passed, one of the entries caught my eye, not because I looked at it deliberately, but because it was in a larger font than the others, or a different color. Something that made it register in my peripheral vision with more specificity than usual, and before I could stop it, my brain processed the first 3 words. They were my name, first and last. I kept walking. I did not stop. I did not look directly at the kiosk, but I had seen it, and seeing it, even peripherally, even partially, felt like something had closed around my wrist. Not physically. I didn't feel anything on my skin. It was interior, a tightening of attention, a sense that part of my awareness was still back at the kiosk, reading the rest of the entry, even as my body continued walking. Rule 3 said, if you have already read one aloud, complete your current round without speaking again until you have exited and re-entered the building. I hadn't read it aloud. I'd seen it. The rule didn't cover seeing, it covered speaking, and I hadn't spoken. But I had read it, hadn't I? My brain had processed the words. 3 words, my own name, in a directory listing on a kiosk in a mall at midnight. And the rest of the entry, the part I hadn't read, was still there, still on the screen, still waiting. I completed the round without going back. I returned to the security office. I sat at the desk and looked at camera 11. The kiosk display was still in its wrong configuration. The text was too small to read on the camera. I could see the shape of the single-column layout, and I could see, or I thought I could see, one entry that was slightly larger than the others, but I couldn't read it from the camera. I would have to go back. I would have to walk up to the kiosk and read what was written next to my name. I didn't. I sat in the security office for the next 2 hours, watching the camera, and at some point I checked the timestamp later, and it was 2:41 a.m. The kiosk returned to its normal display. The entry was gone. The moment it disappeared, the tightness in my attention released. It was like setting down a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. That was the closest I came to breaking a rule by choice, and the reason I almost broke it wasn't fear, or compulsion, or a mysterious force pulling me forward. It was curiosity. Simple human curiosity. My name was on the screen. The rest of the entry existed. It was about me. Of course I wanted to read it. Who wouldn't? And that, I think, is why Rule 3 is written the way it is. The rule doesn't say, don't look at the kiosk. It says, don't read the names aloud and don't write them down. Because looking is almost inevitable. The building knows you'll look. The danger isn't in seeing, it's in the next step. Reading aloud, which is a form of acknowledgement. Writing down, which is a form of recording. These are acts of participation. Seeing is passive. Speaking and writing are active. The building needs you to actively participate. It needs you to take what it's offering and carry it into the world through your own voice or your own hand. I don't know what the full entry said. I will never know. And that not knowing is its own kind of permanent residue, because somewhere in the architecture of that kiosk, or whatever the kiosk is a surface for, there exists a sentence that begins with my name and ends with something I will spend the rest of my life not reading. December was when the rules started to conflict. On the second Saturday of the month, I arrived for my shift and began my midnight round. I walked up to the second level and entered the food court. I counted the tables. 11. 11 was new. I'd seen 10 before, 4 times, but never 11. I noted it and turned to use the east maintenance corridor to bypass the food court, as Rule 1 required. The east maintenance corridor was not the right length. I stood at its entrance and looked down its length and recognized the same spatial distortion from Rule 4. The corridor continued past where it should have ended. The far door, a fire door that opened into the east wing of the second level, was not visible. The corridor simply continued, straight, featureless, drawing. Rule 1 said don't walk through the food court. Rule 4 said don't walk down a corridor that's longer than it should be. The food court was wrong. The bypass was wrong. Both directions were closed. I stood there for what felt like a long time. The card didn't account for this. The rules were written as independent protocols, each addressing a specific anomaly. They didn't contain a hierarchy. They didn't say, if 2 rules conflict, prioritize this one. They assumed the anomalies would occur separately, because they almost always did. But the building didn't have to play by those assumptions, and on this night, it wasn't. I made a decision. I went back down to the first level and completed the round without covering the second floor. This was not prescribed by any rule. It was my own judgment. If both forward paths were compromised, retreat to safe ground and wait. I returned to the security office and watched the cameras. Camera 7 covered the food court. I counted the tables on the grainy feed. I counted 9. The 2 extra tables were gone. I checked the maintenance corridor on camera 14. It looked normal, short, straight, fire door visible at the end. The conflict had lasted maybe 10 minutes. The building had closed 2 paths simultaneously and then reopened them. I didn't know if this was a test, a word I don't like but keep coming back to, or a coincidence, or an escalation. What I knew was that the card system had a gap, and I'd just stepped into it and had to improvise. I started wondering if the card's author had encountered the same thing, if the rules were complete, or if they represented only what one person had experienced. Maybe the author had worked 6 months of shifts and encountered these 6 anomalies and written them down and never encountered the 7th, the 8th, the thing that fell outside the framework. Maybe the building had more rooms than the card had rules. The thought kept me up that morning after I drove home. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and turned the card over in my mind, looking for what wasn't written. The rules told me what to avoid. They told me what to say on the radio. They told me how to move, but they didn't tell me what the building was. They didn't tell me what it wanted. They didn't explain the mechanism. They were purely behavioral, do this, don't do that, and the reasoning was left to me. I went back to work the next Thursday, and the next Friday, and the next Saturday. I kept going back because I needed the money, and because I can admit now, I had developed a relationship with the building that I mistook for control. I knew the patterns. I had the rules. I had my own supplementary judgment for when the rules failed. I was managing it. That was the word I used in my own mind. Managing. The fountain triggered on December 19th. A Sunday morning. My last shift. It was 6:15 a.m. I'd completed my 6 o'clock round and was making my final walk to the main entrance, where I'd exit and wait for the day crew in the parking lot. I walked south through the first floor corridor, past the storefronts, into the south atrium, and the fountain had water in it. The fountain was a circular stone basin, maybe 12 feet across, with a tiered center column that hadn't functioned in years. The stone was dry and slightly dusty. I'd walked past it over 100 times. It was always dry. Now it was full. Not trickling, not overflowing. Full. The water was perfectly still, absolutely motionless, reflecting the ceiling lights with a clarity that made it look less like water and more like a pane of glass set into the basin. Rule 6. If there is water in it, do not stop. Walk at the same pace. Do not look at the water. Exit the building. I kept walking. Same pace. I fixed my eyes on the exit doors ahead of me. The fountain was to my right. The water was in my peripheral vision, and it was still no ripples, no disturbance, nothing. Then I heard my name. Not from behind me, not from the fountain, from everywhere at once, or from inside my own head, or from the acoustic properties of the atrium itself. I couldn't locate it. It was my name, spoken in a voice I recognized. My voice, my exact voice with my exact inflection, the way I sound when I call out to someone I know. Casual, familiar, as if I were calling myself back from the door, saying, "Hey, wait, you forgot something." And Rule 6 said, if someone calls you back, even if it sounds like yourself, do not turn around. I did not turn around. I walked. The exit was 40 feet ahead of me. 30, 20. The voice said my name again, and this time it was closer, and this time it added a word. It said my name, and then it said, wait. 15 feet. 10. I pushed through the exit doors into the December morning. The air was freezing. The parking lot was gray with pre-dawn light. A day shift employee's car was pulling in at the far end. I did not turn around. I walked to my car. I got in. I sat there with the engine running and the heat on and my hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and I watched the exit doors in my rearview mirror. Nothing came out. Nothing appeared in the glass. The doors were just doors. The mall was just a building. A woman in a Target vest walked across the lot carrying a coffee. I drove home. I called Phil at Grayline that afternoon and told him I was resigning, effective immediately. He asked if I'd had a problem. I said no, just a scheduling conflict with school. He said he understood and asked if I could work through the week to give them time to fill the position. I said no. He said fine and told me to drop off the keyring at the mall's management office. I mailed it instead. For about 2 weeks, I convinced myself that I'd handled it correctly. I'd followed the rules. I'd heard my own voice, and I hadn't turned around, and I'd walked out, and nothing had happened. The system had worked. The card's author had warned me about exactly this moment, and I'd been prepared, and I'd survived. Then I started dreaming about the kiosk. Not the kiosk as I'd seen it, not the wrong display with the single column and the long entries. I dreamed about the kiosk showing its normal directory, the regular 2-column tenant list, Panda Express, Subway, GameStop, T-Mobile, except that one of the entries, somewhere in the middle of the alphabetical list, was my name. Not as a store name, as a tenant, as if I were listed among the permanent occupants of the building. And in the dream, I'd walk closer, and the entry would have a suite number, and I'd know that if I went to that suite number, I'd find the store behind the gate, and behind the store would be the space without a back wall, and in that space, I'd find whatever the building had been trying to show me since September. I had this dream 7 times in January. By February, it was every other night. By March, it had faded to once a week. By summer, once a month. Now, more than a year later, I still have it occasionally. It's always the same. The kiosk, my name, the suite number, the walk I never take. I need to say one more thing, and I want to be careful about how I say it, because I don't want it to sound like more than it is. In January, about 2 weeks after I quit, I drove past the mall during the day. I don't know why. I told myself I was taking a different route to campus, which was technically true, but unnecessarily circuitous. I slowed down as I passed the south entrance and looked through the glass doors into the atrium. The fountain was dry. A week later, I drove past again. Dry. A week after that. Dry. In March, on a Saturday afternoon, I parked in the lot and walked into the mall through the main entrance during business hours with shoppers around me and music playing and the food court crowded and noisy. I walked past the kiosk. Normal display. 2 columns. Tenant names I recognized. I walked past the fountain. Dry. I walked the first floor corridor. Normal length. I walked past the freight elevator corridor and the door was closed and there was nothing unusual about it. The mall during the day was just a mall. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was extended or altered or present that shouldn't have been. I stood in the south atrium near the dry fountain and felt nothing. No pull, no voice, no wrongness. But I counted the food court tables. There were 9. And one of them, the one in the northeast corner, between the Panda Express and the Greek place, had a small mark on its surface, a scratch, or an etching, or something that had been pressed into the laminate with a sharp point. I leaned closer. It was a tally mark, 5 vertical lines with a diagonal crossing through them, a group of 5, and next to it, 4 more vertical lines, 9 total. Someone had been counting. I left the mall. I sat in my car. I understood then that the card's author hadn't just worked there and left. They'd come back. They'd walked through the daytime mall and counted the tables and marked the surface so the next person would find it. They'd built the count into the furniture itself, a physical record of the number that should be there, so that whoever came next could verify the baseline without relying on memory alone. This meant the author was still checking, or had checked at least once after they quit. It meant the building's pull didn't end at the exit doors. It meant Rule 6, do not turn around, wasn't just about that final walk on the last shift. It was about every day after, every drive past the building, every urge to verify that the fountain is still dry, that the table's still number 9, that your name is not on the kiosk. The rule wasn't a single instruction. It was a principle. Don't turn around. Don't go back. Don't check. I'm breaking that principle right now by writing this. I know that. Recording what happened, putting it into words, into a document, into a form that could be found and read, is a kind of returning. Rule 3 said don't write the names down. I'm not writing the names. I'm writing everything else. I'm walking the edge of the rule and hoping the distinction holds. Here is what I believe, based on 10 weeks of overnight shifts and 14 months of aftermath. The Caravel Town Center is a building that is also something else. During the day, when it's full of people and noise and light, the something else is dormant, or suppressed, or simply uninterested. At night, when the building empties and the surfaces go quiet, the something else emerges through the architecture itself, through spatial extension, acoustic presence, directory listings, water in a dry fountain. It doesn't attack. It doesn't chase. It offers. It extends a corridor and invites you to walk it. It puts your name on a screen and invites you to read it. It fills the fountain and invites you to look. It speaks in your own voice and invites you to turn around. The rules exist to prevent acceptance of the invitation. Every rule, at its core, is the same instruction. Do not engage. Do not participate. Do not accept what the building is offering. The specific forms vary. Don't walk through. Don't read aloud. Don't investigate. Don't look inside. Don't stop. Don't turn around. But the principle is singular. The building offers, and you refuse. The building extends, and you withdraw. The building speaks, and you remain silent. I don't know what happens if you accept. The card didn't say. The rules don't describe consequences. They only describe avoidance. And the absence of described consequences is, I think, deliberate. Not because the author didn't know, but because describing it would be another form of offering a way of making the thing specific and knowable, and therefore, in some way, present in the mind of the reader. The rules protect you by keeping the threat behavioral rather than conceptual. You don't need to understand what's in the corridor. You just need to not walk down it. I think the person who wrote the rules understood this better than I do. I think they understood that knowledge of the building is itself a form of engagement, and that the safest relationship with the Caravel Town Center is the most ignorant one. Follow the rules. Don't learn why. Go home. I didn't manage to do that. I learned too much, and now I carry it. And the dreams are the proof that carrying it has a weight. The last thing I want to say is about the tally marks on the table. 9 marks, the correct count, etched into the surface by someone who had already left and come back and checked. Someone who knew the rules well enough to write them and disciplined enough to follow them, and still couldn't stop themselves from returning to verify that the baseline held. This is what the building does. It doesn't need to catch you on the night shift. It makes you carry it out with you. It makes you check. It makes you drive past. It makes you count. It makes you write things down. And every time you check, every time you count, every time you put the experience into words, you are in some small, incremental way turning around. I know this. I am doing it anyway. That is the last and most honest thing I can tell you. The Caravel Town Center is open 7 days a week, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. There is a night security position available through Gray Line Protection Services. The listing has been up for 3 months. If you take the job, check the top drawer.